Good evening. Well, have you ever heard of the green-eyed monster? You know the green-eyed monster? That's right. This has to do with the emotions of jealousy and envy. Shakespeare had used that name when he spoke of Othello, saying Othello fell under the sway of the green-eyed monster. But have you ever fell under the sway of the green-eyed monster? I know I have. I'm sure we've all been there at one time or another. But just like with all emotions, of our emotions, God's created us with this ability to feel the emotions of jealousy, to feel the emotion of envy. And it can be for our well-being. That's probably not something you're used to hearing maybe a preacher say about envy and about jealousy. But those are some emotions that actually can benefit us if we know how to properly use the emotion. They're powerful emotions. They both are commonly used interchangeably, but they do have some distinctions. Envy is the desire for someone or the desire for something that belongs to someone else. So we may envy somebody's looks, maybe their job, their family, whatever. Jealousy, on the other hand, is desire to keep someone or to keep something that belongs to us. So it's really the fear that something that we possess is going to be taken away by something or by someone else. And so we are jealous for that. And although it can apply to our jobs, it can apply to our possessions, really it's more, or we generally think of it more as far as the affections that someone has for us. That we may lose those affections to a rival, so we have jealousy. And that may be what the Bible means when it says that God is a jealous God. He's rightfully does not want to lose our affections to Satan or to anything else. And he made a covenant with his people that that they would be his bride, and he was going to be jealous of that relationship. That's from Hosea, gives that idea in Hosea chapter 4. So while God's jealous toward us as righteous, our envy and our jealousy is often unrighteous. We generally don't use it in a proper manner or in the proper way. So the question that sometimes we might, or not sometimes, but the question I want to ask is, why has God created us with the ability to feel jealousy and with the ability to feel envy? If we couldn't feel those two things, we might be oblivious to certain relationships that need to be protected or lack the motivation to grow and to do our best. Feelings of jealousy should be a signal, or maybe you could say it's a wake-up call, that a valued relationship that we have in one way or another is in danger, and that steps might need to be taken to shore up that relationship. And so jealousy brings that to light. But generally what we do, when we have jealousy, instead of recognizing, oh man, there's something wrong with this relationship, we tend to react to the outside force that we think is causing that problem. But maybe the problem is our relationship. Feelings of envy can also be a wake-up call to rightly evaluate who we are. That maybe what we're investing our lives in and what we're building our self-esteem upon is not what we ought to be doing. But as valuable and as helpful as these emotions can be, they're also, as we know, have the potential of leading to damaging behavior. Unchecked envy, unchecked jealousy can poison our spirits, poison our relationship with God and even others. So, like a roaring fire, jealousy and envy, they're very deadly to play with, and I think we often do that. The Bible makes it real clear that allowing both of these to control us is destructive in many ways. Both jealousy and envy are in the list of the works of the flesh in Galatians chapter 5. Paul's description of love in 1 Corinthians 13 says that envy is considered the opposite of love. James tells us that bitter jealousy is not a sign of God's wisdom, and it is a catalyst for conflict. And then you even have these envy being paired up with other things. Romans 13:13 pairs quarreling and jealousy. 1 Corinthians 3:3, envy and strife. Galatians 5:26, provoking and envy. And dissensions and factions and envy in chapter 5, 20 to 21 as well. And on and on and on. We see it paired up with other bad vices. The Bible has numerous examples all throughout of people who struggled with jealousy or struggled with envy. Cain, our first example, one we know well in Genesis 4. The first murder was partly motivated by jealousy because he was jealous that God accepted the gift of Abel, but not his. And God talked to him about that to make a change, and that his sacrifice would become acceptable. But rather than changing, rather than deal with that relationship, he decides to kill and murder Cain. Genesis chapter 37, the story of Joseph's brothers. We see both jealousy and envy cropping up there. All those sons from different wives, but Jacob favored the two sons from his favorite wife, Rachel, and even gave greater gifts to Joseph, so building up that envy that those brothers wanted, and also jealousy as they're losing the affection of their father to just the one. And so that bothered them. And instead of working on that relationship, either with their father or with Joseph or sitting down or maybe talking, they decided to just brood about it until eventually it hit its boiling point, and they lashed out at Joseph. And they didn't deal with their emotion properly. Then you have the destruction of nature and jealousy and envy found in King Saul, which takes up most of 1 Samuel, chapters 15 to 31, where you got these interactions between Saul and the future king of David. Now, Saul, good king at the beginning, but he began to disobey God, and as time progressed, he got jealous of and envious of David, tried to kill him, but God protected him, and David waited upon the Lord to carry out his plan. Acts 5, Ananias and Sapphira, another story of envy or jealousy, where you see this generous example of Barnabas in Acts chapter 4. He sells a piece of property, donates the proceeds to the church, and they were jealous to have those same kind of accolades that they saw that Barnabas got. They wanted it for themselves. So they go and sell their own land. But instead of giving all the money, they wanted to give the money but also keep part for themselves as well. They wanted to hold on to that because they didn't want to give it up, did they? They were envious and jealous of the things they had, but they wanted to make it look like they were going to give it all. So they hand all that over, pretend to donate the proceeds from the sale of the property like Barnabas. But in reality, they did not. And when they were individually confronted about it, their lies, they fell down dead. So we've examined, there's the ways of emotions of jealousy and envy. They are both helpful. They can also be harmful. But what do we do with our feelings? When we have the feelings of jealousy and envy, what do we do with it? What do we do with that? I have a list here of a couple of things that I think would be helpful. First, we need to be, as always, aware of those feelings. Recognize them for what they are. Recognize that we are feeling jealous or we're feeling envious. That's, as always, that's the first step. And then we need to ask ourselves why we feel these ways. Then maybe there's a good reason that we feel jealousy or feel envy. Again, like I said, they're a wake-up call. They should be a sign to us that there is something wrong with the relationship, that there's something wrong with me internally. I need to stop and examine. And I think the last two lessons that Theo's had on Sunday morning, last two Sunday mornings, have been fantastic. In fact, it really fits with the theme I want to go along with in 2023. What are you going to be in 2023? Nice rhyme there, easy to remember, but it fits with everything going on in our society. Because when we look out there in our culture and in our society, what do they want to be? Well, it's all about them, the me-centric attitude. And as we've also noted on these Sunday night lessons, that people in this culture don't seem to know how to deal with their emotions and with their problems. They never learned it. They don't ever stop to think about it. And even I think we struggle to deal with jealousy and deal with envy. We immediately, when we feel those things, we want to push them away thinking, oh, that's sinful, can't do that. It's not a sin. It's an emotion God gave us. It is a sin when we react poorly with that emotion. Those emotions should tell us something about what we're thinking and what we're doing. Those are the first warning signs that God's given us. So we know there's something wrong with that relationship. We know there's something wrong with me internally. How do we deal with that? How do we recognize those problems? And that's going to bring us right back to something I have been trying to impress upon my own children and upon you, for myself as well. In fact, I wish our whole society did it. We need to write down our thoughts. We need to keep a journal, men. We need to keep a diary, ladies. Imagine how much easier it would be to recognize these emotions and these problems we may be feeling or thinking if we kept at least once a week, wrote down our thoughts or what happened, maybe even write down the feelings we've had, and then later on when we're looking over it, maybe 6 months later, we can look back and see those things. Because I think when you look back in time, at a time in our society when people did write things down, they didn't struggle as much with their emotions as we do today because they recognized them. They would stop and think about how the week went rather than just pushing it off to the side and moving forward. And whenever they have an emotion, they just let it run roughshod over everything in their lives. They had self-control. We need to ask ourselves why we're feeling this way. And I think the best way, write it out. Number 3, we need to go to God for help. Whenever we are allowing jealousy and envy to lead us into sin, we need to repent. We need to ask for forgiveness. And as we experience that grace of God, we can reach out for his wisdom, reach out for that strength to overcome the sin and overcome and ground ourselves in the Lord. And often I mention in this series that Satan can use those emotions against us. It's giving Satan the opportunity. We can see jealousy and envy rearing that green ugly head, and we need to realize it's often a deception at work. Our enemy, Satan, wants us to be comparing ourselves with others, which only leads to envy and jealousy. Because it's not only produces a distorted picture of ourselves, it is based on a distorted picture of others. We live in this performance-oriented society now where we're pressed to conform ourselves to the world. And it happens in all kinds of ways. Social media, from Facebook to Twitter to Instagram, TikTok. If you have things like that on your phone, I think TikTok is one of the worst. I remember Alex talked about it. He had that. He got rid of it. The more I read up on that, get rid of it. If you have that on your phone, delete it. It is bad, I think, for the soul. And it is not good for our lives. This is why it is important that our minds and our hearts are focused on God, on his values, on his truths, and the things that he values. In his eyes and in his opinion, every one of us have supreme value. We are each fearfully and wonderfully made. And through jealousy and envy, Satan hinders our ability to see what God has provided us in our lives, which leads to a lack of gratitude. Do you think there's a lack of gratitude in our society today? Man, yeah, there is. Why is that? I think there's a lack of gratitude because of envy and jealousy and the feeling that everything needs to happen for me right now. It's all for me. Like we're entitled to these things. Well, we can counteract jealousy and envy by cultivating that gratitude attitude. 1 Timothy 6:6-8, Paul writes, "But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content." There was a fascinating study I read by a professor named Vicky Medvik. She reveals what she writes as the relative importance of subjective attitudes over and above objective circumstances. And she studied Olympic medalists, and she found that those who received the silver medal were less happy than the one who got the bronze medal. And she said the reason that she'd come to find out was those who got the silver medal would look over at the gold and think how close they were to getting the gold medal, and they would be frustrated that they didn't get the gold medal. They saw themselves as the first loser, right? We've often said that. Whereas the bronze medalists would look over and think, man, I almost didn't make it. I'm just glad to be up here on the platform. I got the bronze, and they're happier. And that is a proven study, not just from her, but from many others. People who got the bronze medal are always happier than the one who got the silver medal in the middle. I found that to be fascinating. But I think it's because they tend to focus on how close they came to winning, but they didn't quite get it. They were not satisfied. So what do we need to do? Well, it goes back to writing down our blessings, right? Count your many blessings. Be content with what you have. And notice and savor, I think we should, all the blessings that are around us, even the little ones, sunshine, the rain, family, friends that may be coming in or that we may be seeing for the Christmas holidays, pets, good books, sports, exercise, cooler weather. But don't forget the spiritual blessings, our relationship with God, God's Word, our relationship with one another in the church. But more importantly, coffee and deviled eggs, right? All these things. But even though they're small, they're things we can be thankful for. We have so much to be thankful for. And once we begin to notice and appreciate them more, we can thank God for them and recognize Him as the gift giver and the fount of every blessing. And ultimately, contentment is not having what we want, but wanting what we already have. Proverbs 14:30, a tranquil heart is life to the body, but passion is rottenness to the bones. And what that proverb is saying is that you're happy and content with what you've got, but when you have a passionate desire for wanting more, what happens? When you want more, you get it. Well, now you want more again. And so you want more, and you want more, and you get so focused on that, you forget everything else and all the good things you have around you, and you become rotten to the bone, as the proverb says. I want to close with a story. It's a long story. Maybe you've heard this one before, about Mr. Wilson and Mr. Thayer. They were both seriously ill, and they shared a small room in a hospital. The room had one window. Mr. Wilson's bed was up next to that window. And part of his treatment, he was allowed to sit up in his bed for an hour each day. But the rest of the time, he had to lay down. The other gentleman, Mr. Thayer, he had to spend his whole time flat on his back. And the two men would pass their days talking about their wives, their children, their grandchildren, the jobs they once had, and the places they've been. And one afternoon, and when Mr. Wilson was propped up for his hour, he was looking out the window and was describing to Mr. Thayer everything he saw. And it became part of the ritual of him describing these things. And Mr. Thayer, who could never get up, was just living for that 1 hour each day to hear about everything that was going on outside the window. And apparently, the window overlooked a park. There was a lake where the ducks and swans were. Children were throwing breadcrumbs to the birds. There was sailing boats and young lovers walking hand in hand, flowers, grass, wonderful time. And he just was living for that because he was stuck in that room day after day, lying on his back. And so he would listen. But one afternoon, there was a parade passing by, and Mr. Wilson was describing it, and Thayer began to think in his mind, why should Mr. Wilson get to be next to the window all day and have all the pleasure of seeing what's going on, and I don't get the chance to? And that thought began to permeate him every day. On and on. And it got to a point where when Mr. Wilson would begin to describe things out the window, instead of finding joy in that, it irritating him. It made him more angry. He would get more frustrated and fuming. His blood pressure was going up. And he was getting upset and more upset. But then one night, Mr. Wilson began to choke. Mr. Thayer heard that. Looked over. He could see him choking, gasping for air. He was trying to get the button to call the nurse, couldn't reach it. And Mr. Thayer did not move a muscle until he heard one last choke and no more breathing. And then that morning, when the nurse did her rounds, she found Mr. Wilson had died. So Mr. Wilson's family was notified. His body was taken away. And as soon as it seemed appropriate to Mr. Thayer, he asked if his bed could be moved over there by the window. Now, even though he wasn't supposed to get up, he managed to prop himself up on an elbow so he could look out the window. And maybe you already know what he saw. A brick wall of another building. Mr. Wilson was only telling him what he wanted to hear to give him some joy in his life. When we are jealous, when we are envious of what we think others have, we are often left with this emptiness, and then we might do whatever it takes to get what that other person has. We want it. But in the end, all the stuff, all the experiences, and all the people that are supposed to make us happy really don't make us happy at all. Because real happiness is found in God, in our relationship with Him. Real happiness is seeking to be righteous and fulfilling the life that God has set out for us to do. And in this life, God has supplied us with all kinds of emotions. Some emotions are meant to always be there to help us along the way. Some emotions are simply there to be little warning signs for us. They're not meant to be warning signs that are always up there. Like when you're driving your car and the check engine light begins to come on, you don't think, boy, I am so glad that check engine light came on. Now, I want to keep that up there so I can know that that needs to be checked. So I'm not going to deal with it, so I know it's always there. Do we do that with our cars? No. We take it in and have it serviced so that the check engine light goes away. When the check engine light comes on, when you begin to feel envious, when you begin to feel jealousy, it's not something that we should just leave there. It's a warning sign. Something is wrong. We need to step back, stop, cool ourselves down if we're upset, and figure out what is it. Is it a relationship problem, or is it a me problem? And we need to turn off the light and not let it stay. Otherwise, we end up like Mr. Thayer, don't we? Where it builds up, or like Cain, and it builds up, and we end up acting out in a way that's way out of line. God gave us these emotions. They're not sinful emotions. We make them sinful emotions. They're emotions that are supposed to help us through this life, not just for you and me, but even for those that are out there in the world who have no idea why they feel the way they do. They've never been taught. They've never learned. And the only place I think they're ever going to see it is from you and me. The only light left in this world is the church. And if they're not going to learn it from us, we know they're not going to learn it from public school or from any school, it seems like nowadays. It can only come from us. So we need, as Theo was saying this morning, to get out there, to pray that we have opportunities to be that light. And as this holiday is coming up, this Christmas coming up, and family may be coming in, or you're going out to see them, maybe you have members of your family that are not part of the body of Christ. Here's opportunities for you to discuss things that are important. Why do we celebrate this holiday? Now, we know Jesus was not born on Christmas Day, but most people, at least they're thinking about it a little bit. Use the opportunity. Help people to see how the life of Christ works in you, so that maybe they may want to reach out for that joy. I've already heard a couple of stories this morning about people who have begun to go into the church or seeing a good light in somebody because of the way they live. And it's changing their own lives. We have no idea how we may be affecting people. But we won't affect them well if we can't manage our own emotions. So let us think and work on that this week